As successful as activists have been in undermining due process by changing the rules of evidence or bringing in prior bad acts evidence or the shield laws that I talked about in a previous video, they've arguably been even more successful in bolstering the credibility of otherwise non-credible accusers. And there's a whole industry dedicated to this. One individual that I mentioned in the book is a Dr. Barbara Ziv. Dr. Ziv has testified in some high-profile cases, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby. And what the likes of Dr. Barbara Ziv do is they try to explain away every bit of exculpatory information that's brought before a court insofar as the reliability of an accuser is concerned. So if an accuser tells lies or tells an inconsistent story or continues to have involvement with an alleged attacker, including continued romantic involvement, they try to explain this all away with psychology. And often what they'll do is that they'll say this erratic behavior is a result of the trauma that was endured by virtue of the attack. Now, the problem with this whole approach is it takes people who make outrageous claims, who make unreliable claims, false claims. It tries to make these claims believable. And they've been very successful. And that's why you have the public, for instance, taking the word of someone like Virginia Roberts, and that story's been in the news a lot here lately. They take these accounts as though they're the gospel truth. In the case of Virginia Roberts, she lied repeatedly. She made very specific, grotesque allegations against Alan Dershowitz, later recanted it. And in spite of that recantation, and in spite of all the issues with her credibility, the media and the public treat her accusations as though they're credible. And this has resulted in very serious consequences for a lot of people. And I'm not going to get into all the details. In the news, there's been a lot about the royal family and Prince Andrew. And I don't want to get into those specifics. I don't want to get off into that rabbit trail. But it amazes me that people will treat these claims as though they're credible. And this didn't just happen overnight. This has been a long-standing effort on the part of these activists to get people to accept these accusations. And I think that's incredibly dangerous. And one example that I can think of, and I cited in the book, was from the time that Brett Kavanaugh was going to be confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. And of course, Christine Blasey Ford brought these accusations. She had nothing to back these accusations up. She was not even close to being credible. Couldn't remember key events, details, etc. And there was this effort to try to make her believable. And NPR had an article about this. I cited this article in the book, and I want to read this because it's so illustrative of what I'm trying to point out and what I'm trying to help people understand by writing this book, how dangerous this is and how this is undermining justice and due process. But the article says as follows: a question on many people's minds is, how well can anyone recall something that happened over 35 years ago? Pretty well, say scientists, if the memory is of a traumatic event. That's because of the key role that emotions play in making and storing memories. Well, the same article goes on to say as follows: however, this doesn't mean that these memories include every detail of the event. The brain holds on to the most important stuff at the expense of the peripheral details. This would explain why Ford says she remembers what happened during the alleged assault, but she can't remember the date of the party or its location. Well, how convenient. We can embrace all of her inculpatory memories, but we can just reject everything that's exculpatory. Obviously, that approach has no place in a system that values justice and due process. And when people like me point this stuff out, we're often accused of being insensitive to victims, or we're victim blaming or victim shaming. That's absolutely not true. And when it comes to these issues of trauma and mental health, I can say I take those issues very seriously. I have nothing but compassion for people who struggle with mental health issues that they just can't help. That doesn't mean that we should take the word of these accusers when they lie, when they behave erratically, when they've exhibited mental health issues. Nobody would want to face a criminal prosecution under those circumstances. So I think we need to move away from this trend where we try to bolster the credibility of otherwise non-credible accusers.